The house was never meant to be a statement. It sat on a hill at the edge of the city, white stone and tall windows, built more for quiet than for display. I bought it 3 years ago after selling my second company. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding it, just because I was tired of translating my life into something they could measure. They found out anyway. My aunt saw a photo online. Someone had tagged me at a charity fundraiser hosted at the house. The word estate appeared in the caption. By Christmas, the news had traveled ahead of me. When I walked into my parents' living room that night, I could feel the shift. Not hostility, appraisal. My brother Daniel hugged me longer than usual. He smelled like pine and cologne. He stepped back and looked at me the way he used to look at new toys when we were children, calculating durability. "I didn't know you were living like royalty," he said, smiling without warmth. "It's just a house," I answered. It wasn't false modesty. The house was space, light, silence, things I'd wanted for years. Daniel had wanted other things. When he was 8, he nearly died from a rare autoimmune disorder. For 3 years, hospitals replaced playgrounds. My parents aged visibly during that time. I was 11 when it began. Old enough to understand fear. Young enough to learn quickly that my needs were negotiable. I learned not to complain. I learned not to win too loudly. I learned that survival earns a certain kind of permanent gravity. Daniel recovered. Mostly. There were scars, physical and otherwise. But the house we grew up in never adjusted its emotional math. He was fragile. I was capable. Fragility required resources. Capability required understanding. By the time we were adults, the pattern was invisible, because it had always been there. Dinner was loud in the way Christmas dinners are, cutlery, overlapping conversations, someone arguing about politics without conviction. But I noticed how often Daniel's gaze returned to me. Eventually he stopped circling. "So?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's talk about the mansion." The word landed heavier than necessary. My mother smiled faintly, as if this were playful. "Your aunt showed us pictures. It's beautiful, thank you," I said. Daniel swirled his wine. "Must be nice. All that space. All that money just sitting there in walls." I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence sometimes shortens conversations. It didn't this time. "You know," he continued, voice lowering. "If things had gone differently when I was a kid, if I hadn't been sick, I probably would have built something like that too." There it was, not accusation, comparison. My father cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. Daniel leaned forward now, elbows on the table. "You should sign it over to me." A few cousins laughed uncertainly. "I'm serious," he added. The laughter thinned. My mother's hand fluttered as if calming air. "Daniel?" "No, Mom." "Why not? He has more than enough. That house alone is worth what, over $1 million. I didn't correct him. "He doesn't need all that," Daniel said. "And let's be honest, my childhood wasn't exactly normal. There are phrases families keep polished for special occasions. After everything he's been through. You were always the strong one." It would mean so much to him. My mother reached for one. "Your brother lost so much time," she said softly. "You remember how it was. Hospital after hospital. He deserves some stability, something substantial." The room had gone quiet in increments. Conversations at the far end of the table dissolved. Daniel's voice dropped into something close to a growl. "Sign the mansion over to me. You can afford another one." It wasn't about shelter. It wasn't even about money. It was about restoring balance to a scale that had tilted away from him. Inside me, something old stirred, guilt trained to respond on command. I remembered hospital chairs, the smell of disinfectant, my parents sleeping in shifts. I remembered telling teachers I didn't need award ceremonies because it was complicated at home. I had understood. Understanding, however, is not a lifetime contract. I set my fork down carefully. "You think this is fair?" I said, not as a challenge but as observation. Daniel met my eyes. "I think it makes sense." My father nodded faintly, as if logic had been invoked. For a moment, I considered explaining the years it took to build what I built. The risks, the nights alone in small apartments while Daniel recovered in a house full of focused love. But explanation invites negotiation. Instead, I said one sentence. The house is owned by an irrevocable trust, and any transfer would require the approval of my board and legal partners. The words weren't loud. They were precise. Silence fell the way it does when a breaker trips and every appliance stops at once. Daniel blinked. What? It's not personally transferable. I added evenly. It's part of a larger asset structure tied to my company's equity agreements. This wasn't theatrics. It was paperwork. My cousin, who worked in finance, shifted in his seat. If it's in a trust, that's locked, he murmured. My father frowned slightly. You never mentioned that. There was never a reason to. Daniel's jaw tightened. So you're hiding behind lawyers, I said. I'm operating within reality. My mother looked between us, unsettled. Couldn't you restructure it? I won't. There was no anger in my voice. Just a boundary placed where the floor used to be soft. What changed in that moment wasn't ownership. It was leverage. The house was no longer a thing that could be emotionally reassigned. It existed in a system bigger than family persuasion. Authority, cold and impersonal, had entered the room through contracts none of them had read. Daniel leaned back slowly. The growl had left him. In its place was something harder to categorize, disbelief maybe. So that's it, he asked. That's it, my father exhaled. Not frustrated, just recalibrating. For the rest of the evening, conversation resumed in fragments. Laughter returned, thinner. My aunt complimented the pie too enthusiastically. No one brought up the mansion again. When I stood to leave, my mother followed me to the hallway. "We'll only want what's fair," she said quietly. "I know," I answered, and I meant it. Fairness had always been measured against Daniel's illness, against what he almost lost, against fear that once felt bottomless. But fairness can't be retroactive. It can't collect from the healthy to compensate the healed. "I'm not taking anything from him," I said gently. "I'm just not giving away what I built." She studied my face as if searching for hardness. She didn't find it. "Will you host next year?" she asked after a moment. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't surrender, it was adjustment. "We'll see," I said. Outside the air was sharp with cold. I sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. The mansion would still be there when I returned. Quiet, lit from within, unchanged. But something else had shifted. For years, Daniel's illness had been gravity. Tonight, it met structure. Not cruelty, not revenge. Just the simple fact that adulthood doesn't redistribute achievement to soothe old imbalances. As I drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, and steadiness, in a family accustomed to bending around one center, sounded like silence after a long echo.